The waves crashed against the jagged rocks below Cordova Lighthouse with unusual ferocity. Elias Thorne stood at the window of his quarters, watching the storm that had been raging for nearly 18 hours. The wind howled like a wounded animal, and rain lashed horizontally against the glass. In his 15 years as lighthouse keeper and marine biologist for the Pacific Northwest Marine Research Station, he had seen many storms, but this one possessed a peculiar intensity that made the hairs on his neck stand on end. Elias checked his watch. 2:17 a.m. Sleep would not come tonight, not with the tempest threatening to tear his lighthouse from its foundations. The familiar loneliness settled over him like an old, worn coat. At 42, he had grown accustomed to solitude. After his brief, failed marriage 10 years ago, he had retreated to this remote outpost on the rugged Washington coastline, preferring the company of seabirds and tide pools to the complexities of human relationships. His radio crackled with static. Reception was always poor during storms, but tonight it seemed particularly bad. Elias made a mental note to check the antenna once the weather cleared. The nearest town was 30 miles away, and his monthly supply drop wasn't due for another 2 weeks. He was essentially alone out here, just as he preferred. The lighthouse's powerful beam cut through the darkness, sweeping across the churning waters below. There was something almost meditative about the rhythm. 15 seconds of light, 5 seconds of darkness, repeating endlessly through the night. Like his own life, periods of clarity punctuated by stretches of emptiness, cycling without end. Elias made himself a cup of tea and settled into his weathered armchair. Beside him, stacks of research journals and half-finished manuscripts cluttered his small desk. His work on intertidal ecosystems had earned him respect in academic circles, but few people knew the man behind the publications. Here, in his solitary kingdom of rock and water, Elias had found a certain peace in his methodical observations of nature's patterns. Around dawn, the storm began to subside. The howling wind softened to an occasional gust, and the pounding rain eased to a gentle patter. Elias, who had dozed fitfully in his chair, roused himself and peered out at the lightening sky. The sea remained agitated, waves still crashing against the shore, but the worst had passed. Pulling on his heavy raincoat and boots, Elias headed outside to assess any damage. The storm would have disturbed the tide pools he had been studying, possibly bringing in unusual specimens from deeper waters. Such disturbances often provided rare research opportunities. The air smelled of salt and ozone as he made his way down the steep path from the lighthouse to the rocky shore below. Debris littered the narrow beach. Driftwood, seaweed, plastic bottles, and other human refuse that never ceased to appear even in this remote location. Elias began his usual post-storm routine, scanning the shoreline for anything requiring his attention. That's when he saw it, a shape half buried in the wet sand near the water's edge. At first, Elias thought it might be a seal or perhaps a dolphin wash ashore. It wouldn't be the first time he'd had to deal with stranded marine mammals. But as he drew closer, his breath caught in his throat. It was humanoid. Elias approached cautiously, his heart pounding. The figure lay face down, unmoving. It appeared female in form, with a slender build and what looked like long, silver-blue hair splayed across the sand. But this was clearly not a human woman. Her skin had a faint bluish tint with an almost pearlescent quality, and what Elias had initially taken for hair seemed more like fine, filamentous appendages that moved slightly in the breeze. She wore a close-fitting garment of unfamiliar material that shimmered with an iridescence reminiscent of fish scales. "Hello," Elias called out tentatively, knowing it was absurd but unsure what else to do. "Can you hear me?" To his shock, the figure stirred. Slowly, painfully, she turned over. Elias gasped involuntarily. Her face was hauntingly beautiful, yet undeniably alien. High cheekbones, large eyes with vertical pupils like a cat's, and small gill-like structures pulsing weakly at the base of her neck. Those eyes, a deep violet color, focused on him with startling intelligence. She tried to rise, but collapsed back onto the sand with a soft cry of pain. Elias noticed a deep gash along her side, oozing a thick, silvery fluid that must have been her blood. Her garment was torn in several places, revealing more injuries beneath. Most alarming, however, was how violently she was shivering. Whatever her normal body temperature might be, she was clearly suffering from exposure to the cold coastal air. Elias stood frozen, his mind racing. This was beyond anything in his experience. Should he call the authorities? But who exactly? The Coast Guard? NASA? Some secret government agency that dealt with extraterrestrials? And what would they do to her? The creature, the woman, locked eyes with him again, and Elias saw something unmistakable there: fear. Not just the fear of an injured animal, but a complex, sentient fear tinged with desperation and hope. In that moment, his decision was made. "I'm going to help you," he said, knowing she probably couldn't understand but hoping his tone would convey his intentions. "I need to move you to shelter." She didn't resist when he carefully slid his arms beneath her. She was surprisingly light, despite being nearly as tall as his own 6 feet. As he lifted her, she trembled violently, her skin feeling cool and slightly textured against his hands. A small sound escaped her, something between a whimper and a musical note. The climb back to the lighthouse was arduous. Twice he nearly lost his footing on the slick path. The alien woman remained conscious but weak, occasionally making those strange musical sounds that seemed to express pain or distress. Inside, Elias gently laid her on his sofa and stepped back, suddenly uncertain. Her shivering had intensified, teeth, or what appeared to be teeth, chattering audibly. Her violet eyes darted around the room, taking in her surroundings with obvious intelligence despite her weakened state. "You're freezing," Elias muttered, mostly to himself. He hurried to his bedroom and returned with the only blanket he owned, a worn, handmade wool throw that had belonged to his grandmother. It was nothing special, just old Scottish wool in faded blue and gray patterns, frayed at the edges from years of use. But it was warm, and right now that's what mattered. Elias carefully draped the blanket over the alien woman's shivering form. "This should help with the cold," he said, tucking it around her gently. Her reaction was immediate and utterly unexpected. The moment the blanket touched her, she went completely still. Her violet eyes widened, staring at the wool covering as if it were made of pure gold. With trembling hands, she reached up and touched the fabric, running her slender fingers over the intricate weave with a reverence that seemed almost religious. A sound emerged from her throat, no longer pained but melodic, rising and falling in a pattern that conveyed profound emotion. Tears, actual tears, though they seemed to have a faint luminescence, welled in her strange eyes and rolled down her blue-tinged cheeks. She looked up at Elias with an expression so intense it made him step back. It was gratitude, yes, but something far beyond that, a look of absolute wonder and veneration that made no sense at all. It was as if he had presented her with the most precious artifact in the universe, not a threadbare old blanket. It's just a blanket," Elias said awkwardly, unsettled by her reaction. The alien woman clutched the edges of the blanket, drawing it closer around herself with deliberate, almost ceremonial movements. She began to make soft sounds, clearly trying to communicate. Her slender fingers traced patterns on the wool, following the woven design, as if it contained some profound meaning. Elias stood watching, utterly baffled. In the pale morning light filtering through his windows, with the storm now reduced to a gentle rain pattering against the glass, he was suddenly struck by the absurdity and wonder of the situation. He had an alien being on his sofa, one who was treating his grandmother's old blanket like a sacred relic. His quiet, predictable life had just become anything but. The first day with the alien woman was a bewildering exercise in improvised care and failed communication. Elias cleaned and bandaged her wounds as best he could, relieved to find they weren't as severe as he initially feared. Her silvery blood coagulated quickly when exposed to air, forming a protective seal over the injuries. She seemed to heal remarkably fast, which gave Elias some hope. He tried various approaches to communication, speaking slowly, drawing pictures, pointing to objects, but progress was minimal. She appeared to understand that he was trying to help, responding with what seemed like gratitude, but the language barrier remained formidable. The one constant was her attachment to the blanket. She refused to be separated from it, even briefly, clutching it with an intensity that continued to baffle Elias. By nightfall, she had regained enough strength to sit up and accept small amounts of water and soft food. Elias watched in fascination as she examined everything he offered with careful deliberation before consuming it. Her movements were graceful despite her injuries, almost fluid, as if she were perpetually moving through water rather than air. As Elias prepared for bed, arranging a makeshift sleeping area for himself on the floor near the sofa, a peculiar sound drew his attention to the window. Outside, with a lighthouse beam swept across the now calm sea, a school of bioluminescent jellyfish had gathered, an unusual sight this close to shore. Their blue glow pulsed in an odd, synchronized pattern that seemed almost deliberate. "Strange," Elias murmured. "They don't normally behave like that." The alien woman had noticed too. She moved to the window, still wrapped in the blanket, and pressed a hand against the glass. The jellyfish seemed to respond, their pulsing light intensifying. A soft, melodic sound came from her throat, and for a moment, Elias could have sworn the creature's light pulsed in the same rhythm as her song. He dismissed it as coincidence. The stress and strangeness of the day must be affecting his perception. That night, Elias dreamed of the ocean depths. Vivid, intense visions of structures that looked like cities beneath the waves, populated by beings similar to his visitor. He woke before dawn, unsettled, to find his computer screen flashing erratically, though he was certain he'd turn it off. The woman was still asleep on the sofa, one hand resting protectively on the blanket, the other extended toward his desk where the computer sat. As Elias watched, the screen stabilized, displaying a series of complex symbols he didn't recognize before going dark. The second day brought new oddities. The tide pools Elias regularly studied were teeming with unusual activity. Species that normally avoided each other were clustering together. A family of typically shy seals had taken up position on rocks directly below the lighthouse, their eyes seemingly fixed on his windows. Most striking, the instruments in his small research lab registered unexpected readings. Fluctuations in electromagnetic fields, minute changes in water composition, and atmospheric anomalies centered around the lighthouse. The alien woman grew stronger by the hour. She began attempting to communicate more deliberately, making sounds that gradually became more patterned and distinct. By midday, Elias realized she was trying to mimic English words. Elias, she pronounced carefully, pointing to him after hearing him say his own name multiple times. "Yes, that's right," he responded, unable to hide his excitement. "I'm Elias. What's your name? Who are you?" She considered for a moment, then placed a hand over her chest. "Lyra," she said, the syllables carrying a musical quality that made the simple name sound like the beginning of a song. "Lyra," Elias repeated. "It's nice to meet you, Lyra." He gestured to the blanket she still kept wrapped around her. "You seem very fond of that." Lyra's expression brightened. She stroked the blanket reverently and then did something unexpected. She took Elias's hand and placed it on the blanket, covering it with her own. The moment their hands made contact through the fabric, Elias felt a strange, tingling sensation, almost like a mild electric current, but pleasant rather than painful. "Cossolari," Lyra said carefully, emphasizing each syllable. "Cossolari. Cossolari? Is that what you call the blanket?" Lyra shook her head, frustrated by the limitations of their communication. She pointed to the blanket, then to the action of Elias giving it to her, then made a sweeping gesture that somehow conveyed immense significance. "The gift is important somehow," Elias guessed. Lyra nodded emphatically, looking relieved. "Gift? Important. Very important." She struggled with the words. "Signal. Makes. Echo. Echo. What kind of echo?" But explaining seemed beyond her current vocabulary. Instead, she turned her attention to Elias's laptop, which had begun to flicker again. To his astonishment, Lyra approached it with confidence and placed her hand on the screen. The flickering stopped, replaced by a steady glow. When she removed her hand, the screen displayed a crude diagram, circles within circles, with lines radiating outward, like ripples in a pond. "You give." She pointed to Elias, then to the blanket, then to the center of the diagram. "Makes this." She indicated the radiating lines. "Calls others." A chill ran down Elias's spine. "Others? Other people like you." Lyra nodded, her expression a mix of hope and concern. "Yes, others come. Soon." The implications hit Elias like a physical blow. His simple act of kindness, giving a blanket to a being in need, had somehow triggered a signal, and now others were coming. Whether that was good or bad remained to be seen. As if confirming his thoughts, the lighthouse's radio burst into life, crackling with voices. The Coast Guard was reporting unusual sonar readings offshore. Something large was moving in the deep waters of the Pacific, something their instruments couldn't properly classify. The marine wildlife around the lighthouse continued to exhibit strange behavior as the third day dawned. The seal colony had doubled in size overnight. Seabirds circled in complex, spiraling patterns. Most strikingly, a pod of orcas had appeared, swimming in tight formation just beyond the breakers' behavior. Almost never seen so close to shore. Elias's communication with Lyra improved rapidly. Her facility with language was remarkable. She seemed to absorb new words and concepts at an accelerated rate. By mid-morning, she was forming complete, if simple, sentences. "My people, sensitive to kindness," she explained haltingly, still clutching the blanket. "Feel it like you feel heat from fire." The blanket, gift from stranger with no reason, makes strong signal. "Very rare, very special. But it's just an old blanket," Elias said, bemused. "It wasn't valuable." "Value not an object," Lyra insisted. "Value in giving. Unexpected kindness. Strongest energy my kind knows." She explained, as best she could with her limited vocabulary, that her species, which she called the Varen, possessed technology based on what humans might call empathic energy. Emotions, particularly positive ones like compassion and altruism, generated patterns they could detect, amplify, and utilize. When Elias had given her the blanket, an act of pure compassion with no expectation of return, it had created a particularly powerful resonance. "My ship," she explained, pointing toward the sea, damaged in storm. "I escaped, but ship sinks. Deep water now." She made a descending motion with her hand. "Signal from blanket will help others find me." "And these others, they're coming to rescue you?" Elias asked. Lyra nodded, but her expression remained concerned. "Yes, but others may come too. Not all." Friendly. As the day progressed, Elias's equipment began registering more anomalies. His computer turned itself on and off randomly. The lighthouse's weather instruments displayed impossible readings. Most worryingly, his satellite phone, his only reliable link to the mainland, stopped working entirely. By afternoon, the blanket itself began exhibiting strange properties. In certain lights, it seemed to shimmer with a faint, bluish glow, similar to the bioluminescence of the jellyfish that still swarmed offshore. When Lyra held it, the effect intensified. She explained that it was absorbing and amplifying the resonance of his gift, creating a beacon that her people could detect across vast distances. "Like lighthouse," she said, pointing to the tower above them. "Guide ships to safe harbor. Blanket guides my people to me." As evening approached, Elias spotted a Coast Guard cutter on the horizon, heading toward the lighthouse. Unusual activity like that reported offshore wouldn't go unnoticed for long. He felt a stab of anxiety. How would he explain Lyra's presence? What would authorities do if they discovered her? His concerns were interrupted by a sharp intake of breath from Lyra. She stood at the window, her violet eyes fixed on the darkening sky to the west. Following her gaze, Elias saw what had captured her attention. Unusual cloud formations gathering over the ocean, swirling in patterns that seemed to defy natural weather systems. "They come," Lyra whispered, clutching the blanket tighter. Both sides. Both sides? What do you mean? Lyra turned to him, her expression grave. My people divided. Some believe in cooperation with others. Some believe in taking power. She struggled to find the right words. Signal from blanket very strong. Both sides detect. The implications sank in. Elias had inadvertently placed himself in the middle of what sounded like a factional conflict among an advanced alien species. And now representatives of both factions were converging on his lighthouse. As darkness fell, the Coast Guard vessel drew nearer. Simultaneously, the clouds over the western horizon began to glow with pulsating lights that no natural phenomenon could explain. The wildlife around the lighthouse responded with increasing agitation, the seals barking loudly, seabirds wheeling and crying overhead. Elias made a decision. We need to hide you, he told Lyra, at least from the Coast Guard. I have an old boathouse below the lighthouse. It's not much, but it's out of sight. Lyra nodded her understanding. As they prepared to leave, the radio crackled to life again. The Coast Guard was requesting permission to land a team at the lighthouse to investigate the unusual oceanic and atmospheric activity in the area. They would arrive within the hour. Elias helped Lyra down the treacherous path to the small, weathered boathouse nestled among the rocks. Inside was little more than an old rowboat, fishing equipment, and some basic supplies. Not comfortable, but it would keep her hidden temporarily. Stay here, he instructed. I'll deal with the Coast Guard, then come back for you. Lyra caught his arm before he could leave. Dangerous, she said, her violet eyes intense. The blanket, Cochalary, its signal grows stronger in darkness. Those who wish to take its power may come before your people leave. What can we do? She thought for a moment. Water weakens signal. If danger comes, take blanket to water. Elias nodded, though he wasn't entirely sure he understood. He headed back up to the lighthouse, his mind racing with improvised explanations for the Coast Guard and growing concern about the otherworldly lights now clearly visible among the clouds offshore. The Coast Guard team arrived precisely as predicted. 4 officers in a small landing craft, clearly puzzled by their assignment, but professionally methodical. Elias met them at the small dock, offering a carefully constructed story about unusual marine behavior following the storm, likely due to temperature changes and underwater currents. He showed them his research data, strategically edited to remove the most inexplicable readings. Lieutenant Commander Murray, the team leader, seemed partially satisfied with Elias's explanations, but remained troubled by the atmospheric phenomena now clearly visible offshore. Dr. Thorne, she said, emphasizing his title with a hint of skepticism, we've received reports of unusual lights and electromagnetic disturbances centered around this area. Our instruments are showing readings that our technicians can't explain. Are you certain there's nothing else you've observed? Elias maintained his composure, attributing the phenomena to a combination of post-storm atmospheric conditions and bioluminescent algae blooms. But as they spoke in his small research room, events outside took a dramatic turn. A blinding flash of light erupted from the direction of the boathouse, followed by a sound like thunder. The Coast Guard officers rushed to the window. What they saw left them speechless, a column of shimmering blue-white light extending from the boathouse into the swirling clouds above. What the hell is that? Murray demanded. Before Elias could formulate a response, his equipment began to malfunction spectacularly. Monitors flashed with strange symbols, instruments sparked, and the lighthouse beam, which should have been sweeping steadily across the water, began pulsing erratically. Sir, we've got multiple contacts approaching the shore, one of the officers reported, checking a handheld device. Surface and subsurface. Nothing matching known signatures. Elias made a split-second decision. I need to secure the lighthouse systems, he said with as much authority as he could muster. You should return to your vessel and maintain a safe distance. This could be an electromagnetic anomaly affecting electronics. Murray hesitated, torn between protocol and curiosity. Dr. Thorne, if you know something about what's happening. I'm as confused as you are, Elias interrupted, already moving toward the door. But the lighthouse systems are my responsibility. Please, for your team's safety, return to your boat. Perhaps it was his tone of urgency, or perhaps the increasing electronic chaos around them. But Murray finally nodded. We'll stand offshore and monitor. But we're calling for backup. Whatever this is, it's beyond our standard protocols. The moment the Coast Guard team departed, Elias raced down the path toward the boathouse. The column of light had intensified, and he could now see it was emanating directly from the structure. As he approached, a portion of the boathouse roof simply disintegrated, vaporized by the energy pouring upward. Inside, he found Lyra standing in the center of the small space. The blanket clutched her chest. The fabric was no longer a faded blue-gray wool, but seemed transformed, luminous, shifting with patterns of light that moved like living things across its surface. Lyra herself was changed, her skin glowing with the same ethereal luminescence, her eyes brilliant violet beacons in the darkness. "They come!" she shouted over the rising whine of energy around them. Both sides approach. The blankets signal, stronger than I thought, calling them all. What can we do? Elias had to shield his eyes from the intensity of the light surrounding her. Water. Lyra pointed toward the sea. Must take blanket to water before wrong ones arrive. Understanding dawned. Lyra had mentioned that water weakened the signal. If they could submerge the blanket, perhaps they could dampen its beacon-like effect, giving the right faction of her people time to reach them first. Together, they ran from the disintegrating boathouse toward the shoreline. Behind them, the swirling clouds had formed into a massive vortex, and within it, Elias could make out shapes, geometric formations that seemed to be descending through the atmospheric disturbance. Ahead, the sea was equally disturbed, great swells rising unnaturally, and beneath the surface, lights pulsed in the deep water. They reached the edge of the water just as a tremendous rumble shook the ground beneath their feet. From the sky, a massive object was descending, a craft of some kind, its surface rippling with the same energy patterns now visible on the blanket. From the sea, something equally large was rising, displacing water in great, frothing waves. "Too late," Lyra whispered, her voice barely audible over the cacophony of energies converging around them. Both arrived together. The aerial craft touched down on the rocky shore less than 100 yards from where they stood. Its surface rippled like liquid metal, finally solidifying into a sleek, oval structure. A seam appeared in its side, widening to reveal figures emerging. Beings similar to Lyra, but taller, their movements more rigid, their expression severe. They wore close-fitting garments that seemed to absorb rather than reflect light. Simultaneously, the object rising from the sea breached the surface completely. Another craft, this one more organic in appearance, with curves and protrusions reminiscent of marine creatures. It settled half in, half out of the water near the shore. From it emerged more of Lyra's kind, though these wore flowing garments of various hues and moved with the same fluid grace she possessed. Lyra gripped Elias's arm. "The ones from Sky, separatists, believe in taking power, using resonance as a weapon." She nodded toward those from the sea. "WaterClan, my people, believe in harmony, sharing resonance with all life." The two groups advanced toward each other, stopping several yards apart, their attention fixed on Lyra and Elias, or more specifically, on the glowing blanket still clutched in Lyra's arms. A tall figure from the separatist group stepped forward. "Researcher Lyra," he spoke in perfect, unaccented English, his voice carrying an undertone that vibrated in Elias's chest. "Your signal has drawn significant attention. The resonance artifact you possess must be secured." From the WaterClan, a female figure moved forward in response. "The Cossalary is not yours to claim, Morden. Its resonance was freely given, its power born of compassion, not coercion." "Semantics, Vela," the one called Morden replied, dismissively. "Power is power, regardless of its source. And this," he gestured toward the blanket, "is the purest resonance signature we have detected in a century." Imagine the applications. Elias felt Lyra trembling beside him, not from fear, but from what seemed like suppressed anger. The blanket is not a weapon, she said firmly. Its resonance came from kindness. Using it as you intend would corrupt its very nature. Morden's expression hardened. Your research faction has always lacked vision, Lyra. Resonance is the greatest force in the universe. Why should we limit ourselves to passive reception when we could harness it actively? Because that's not how it works, Elias found himself saying, stepping forward despite the absurdity of a human inserting himself into an alien dispute. From what Lyra has told me, this energy, this resonance, comes from compassion, from giving without expectation. Trying to weaponize it would be like trying to build a bomb from a heartbeat. Morden regarded him with cold curiosity. The human speaks as if he understands concepts beyond his species' comprehension. Perhaps he understands better than you. Morden, Vela interjected. He is, after all, the source of the resonance. The gift was his. This revelation caused a stir among both groups. Morden's gaze sharpened as he reassessed Elias. You created this level of resonance? Impossible. Your species barely registers on empathic wavelengths. Yet he did, Lyra insisted. A simple gift, freely given to a stranger in need. No expectation, no agenda, pure compassion. The strongest resonance comes not from grand gestures, but from authentic kindness. As they argued, Elias became aware of movement around them. The marine life that had been gathering since Lyra's arrival was congregating in ever greater numbers. Seals, sea lions, even the orcas were now clearly visible just offshore. The seabirds wheeled overhead in tightening spirals. Most strangely, the jellyfish that had been pulsing in the shallows began to wash ashore in unprecedented numbers, their bioluminescence intensifying as they approached. Morden noticed, too, his expression darkening. Enough discussion. The artifact comes with us for proper study and application. He gestured, and several of his companions moved forward, producing devices that hummed with ominous energy. No, Elias said, stepping in front of Lyra protectively. The blanket stays with her. Stand aside, human, Morden commanded. This does not concern you further. It was my gift, Elias countered. That makes it my concern. One of Morden's companions raised his device, aiming it toward Elias. Before he could activate it, however, a bizarre phenomenon intercepted the threat. The jellyfish that had been washing ashore suddenly launched themselves through the air, dozens, then hundreds of them, forming a living shield between Elias and the Separatists. As they moved, their bioluminescence intensified to blinding levels. Vela stepped forward, her expression a mixture of awe and determination. You see, Morden, even the simplest life forms respond to true resonance. They protect its source. Morden's face contorted with frustration. Parlor tricks. The marine life is simply responding to empathic manipulation from your faction. No, Lyra said firmly. We are not controlling them. They respond to the resonance itself, to the energy of the gift. That is what you have never understood, Morden. True resonance cannot be controlled or weaponized. It can only be channeled, amplified, shared. As if to illustrate her point, the blanket in her arms pulsed with renewed brilliance. The energy patterns flowing across its surface seemed to reach out, connecting with the bioluminescence of the jellyfish, the eyes of the seals watching from the rocks, even the disturbed surface of the sea itself. For a moment, everything around them, water, wildlife, even the air, seemed to vibrate in harmony. Elias felt it too, a wave of sensation that was neither sound nor light, but something that resonated within him at a fundamental level. It felt like the emotional equivalent of a perfect chord, complex yet harmonious, poignant yet uplifting. The Separatists faltered, visibly affected by the phenomenon. Several lowered their devices, their expressions confused. Morden alone seemed to resist, his face hardening with effort. This changes nothing, he insisted, though his voice lacked its former conviction. The artifact still. He was interrupted by a new development. From the WaterClan's vessel emerged a figure unlike the others, elderly by the appearance, moving with deliberate slowness, supported by two younger Varen. The assembled Water Clan members bowed their heads respectfully as the elder approached. Elder Nor, Vela acknowledged with evident respect. The elder ignored the formalities, moving directly toward Lyra and Elias. When she spoke, her voice carried the same musical quality as Lyra's, but with greater depth and resonance. "So this is the source," she said, her ancient eyes studying Elias with penetrating intensity. "A human whose simple kindness created a cossalary of such power that it called to us across the void between worlds." She turned to Morden. "You still do not see, after all these cycles? The very resonance you seek to harness rejects your methods. Force corrupts its nature. Control diminishes its power. That is why your faction's experiments always fail." Morden's resolve seemed to waver in the face of the elder's conviction. Behind him, more of his companions had lowered their weapons, affected by the harmonizing wave still emanating from the blanket. "A demonstration, perhaps," Elder Nor suggested. She gestured to Lyra. "May I?" Lyra nodded and carefully handed the glowing blanket to the elder. Nor held it reverently between her hands, then turned to Elias. "Would you share with us," she asked, "your thoughts when you gave this to Lyra?" The truth of that moment, unfiltered. Elias swallowed, suddenly self-conscious under the gaze of so many alien beings. But he answered honestly, "I just saw someone suffering, someone hurt and cold. I didn't think about it. I just wanted to help." "Exactly," Nurse said softly. "No calculation, no expectation of return, just a pure instinct to ease another's suffering." She turned to Morden. "This is what you cannot replicate in your laboratories, what you cannot extract or synthesize. This is the essence of cossalary." She held the blanket higher, and to Elias's astonishment, it began to unravel, not falling apart, but transforming. The threads separated, each one becoming a strand of pure light that expanded outward in all directions. Within seconds, they were surrounded by a network of glowing filaments that connected everyone present, Varen from both factions, Elias, even the watching wildlife, in a web of gentle radiance. Through these connections, Elias experienced something extraordinary, emotions not his own, flowing through him like currents. He felt Lyra's gratitude and affection, Vela's determined hope, the elder's ancient wisdom. More surprisingly, he felt the confusion and dawning wonder from many of the separatists, including Morden himself, as they experienced the unfiltered connection that true resonance created. For a moment that seemed to stretch into eternity, they were all linked in a web of shared consciousness. Not invasive or controlling, but open and honest, a pure communication beyond words or concepts. When the light finally receded, flowing back into the blanket which reformed in Nor's hands, the beach had fallen silent. Even the sea seemed calmer, the wildlife watching with what Elias could only interpret as reverence. Morden stood motionless, his face reflecting an internal struggle. The rigid certainty that had defined him moments before had cracked, revealing vulnerability beneath. "I felt it," he said finally, his voice stripped of its former authority. "The source, the connection." He looked at his companions, many of whom appeared equally shaken. "We have been approaching this all wrong." Vela stepped forward cautiously. "Then you understand now? Why we protect the natural resonance rather than trying to harness it?" "I understand that there is much I do not understand," Morden replied, a humility in his tone that seemed to surprise even his own faction. "This experience requires reconsideration of our methods." Elder Nor nodded, satisfaction evident in her ancient eyes. She turned to Elias, offering the reconstituted blanket back to him with a formal gesture. "The cossalary returns to its creator," she said. "Its purpose is fulfilled. It has bridged worlds and minds. The resonance will fade now, but its impact remains." Elias hesitated before accepting it. "It's just an old blanket again?" "Nothing touched by true resonance remains just anything," Nor replied with a smile that reminded Elias of his grandmother. "It carries an echo now, a memory of connection, but its primary purpose to call us together, is complete. The standoff between the factions had dissolved into cautious dialogue. Varen from both groups were speaking in their melodic language, occasionally glancing toward Elias and Lyra. The threat of conflict seemed to have passed, transformed by the shared experience of the resonance web. In the distance, lights appeared on the horizon, more Coast Guard vessels responding to Lieutenant Commander Murray's call for backup. Elias felt a spike of anxiety. "Your people approach in greater numbers," Vela observed. "It would be unwise for us to remain." Morden nodded in rare agreement. "We should withdraw. This world is not ready for open contact." He turned to his faction. "Prepare for departure." As the Separatists returned to their craft, Morden paused, looking back at Elias. "Human," he said, "your species contains unexpected depths. Perhaps there is more to learn from you than we presumed." With that cryptic statement, he rejoined his companions. Elder Nor approached Lyra, speaking softly in their native tongue. Lyra listened attentively, occasionally nodding. When they finished, Lyra turned to Elias with mixed emotions playing across her features. "My mission is complete," she explained. "I was sent to study marine ecosystems, to assess compatibility with our own. I never expected." She gestured to the blanket he now held. "This changes much. Our understanding of humans must be reconsidered." "You're leaving," Elias said. It wasn't a question. "A must. Your authorities approach." Questions would be asked that neither of us could answer. Her violet eyes held his. "But I am not leaving immediately. Elder Nor believes I should continue my research, with modifications." The Water Clan began returning to their vessel, which had begun to sink partially back beneath the waves. Elder Nor paused before boarding, making a gesture toward the sky that somehow conveyed both farewell and gratitude. Soon only Lyra remained with Elias on the shore, the blanket between them, as Coast Guard searchlights began sweeping the coastline nearby. "Come with me," Elias said suddenly. "Back to the lighthouse. I can hide you, at least until they've gone." Lyra smiled. "Yes, we have much to discuss. My continued research will require a local guide." Together they hurried back up the path to the lighthouse, reaching it just as the first Coast Guard helicopter appeared overhead. Inside, everything had returned to normal, the equipment functioning properly, the lighthouse beam steadily sweeping the darkness. Lieutenant Commander Murray arrived 20 minutes later with reinforcements, only to find Dr. Elias Thorne calmly working at his computer, analyzing data from what he described as an unusual electromagnetic phenomenon, likely related to tectonic activity offshore. His detailed scientific explanations and calm demeanor eventually satisfied the suspicious officers, who found no evidence of anything beyond natural, if unusual, oceanic behavior. After they departed, promising to maintain offshore patrols for the next few days, Elias finally relaxed. He went to the small storage room where Lyra had hidden herself and opened the door. "They're gone," he said. "At least for now." Lyra emerged, still wrapped in the now ordinary-looking blanket. "Your explanation was very convincing. Your authorities believe you." "Scientists are allowed to be eccentric," Elias replied with a small smile. "Especially ones who choose to live alone in lighthouses." As dawn broke over the eastern horizon, they stood together at the lighthouse window, watching the Water Clan vessel slip beneath the waves and the Separatist craft dissolve into the cloud cover. The extraordinary events of the night seemed dreamlike in the growing light of an ordinary day. "What happens now?" Elias asked quietly. Lyra turned to him, her violet eyes reflecting the sunrise. "I have been assigned to continue observation of this region and of human resonance capabilities. It seems I require local accommodation for an extended period. The lighthouse has a spare room," Elias heard himself saying. "Needs some work, but it's yours if you want it. And you? Are you prepared for what this means? The questions? The secrecy?" Elias considered the questions seriously. His orderly, predictable life would be forever changed. There would be risks, complications, the constant need for discretion. Yet the alternative, returning to his solitary existence after glimpsing such wonders, seemed impossible now. "I think," he said slowly, that some discoveries are worth the complications they bring. Lyra smiled, a gesture she had clearly learned from him but made entirely her own. Then I accept your offer, Elias Thorne. Consider it an exchange. You have given me shelter, and I will share knowledge of the stars. Fair trade, he agreed. 6 months later, the residents of the coastal town nearest to Cordova Lighthouse had grown accustomed to occasional sightings of Dr. Thorne's research assistant, a quiet woman with unusual eyes who kept to herself but showed remarkable insight during her infrequent visits. Local fishermen reported strange good fortune in waters near the lighthouse, with healthier catches and calmer seas. Marine biologists noted unprecedented recovery in damaged reef systems along that stretch of coastline. Elias's research took new directions, incorporating insights that his colleagues found revolutionary, if occasionally puzzling. His papers on interspecies communication and empathic resonance in marine ecosystems were initially considered fringe theories, but gradually gained respect as the evidence mounted. The lighthouse itself remained much as it always had, a solitary beacon on a rocky shore. But within its walls, two beings from different worlds shared knowledge, stories, and occasional moments of resonance that would have astonished both their peoples. On cool evenings, they would sometimes sit together on the lighthouse balcony, looking out at the stars or the depths of the sea. Between them, often draped across both their shoulders, was an old wool blanket, faded, frayed at the edges, and to most eyes, entirely ordinary. But sometimes, when the light hit it just right, one might glimpse a faint shimmer across its surface, an echo of connection, a memory of bridges built between worlds through one simple act of kindness. Elias would occasionally catch Lyra stroking the fabric with that same reverence she had shown on the first day. When he asked her about it once, she simply smiled and said, "It reminds me that the universe's greatest powers often hide in its simplest gestures." He understood then what she meant. He had given an alien woman a blanket, and she had treated it like a sacred gift. In doing so, she had taught him that perhaps it was